admired and loved him. That's why we were there. But at the same time, there was no enforced sense that you had to have an awe of him. There was a surprising absence of formality in the Reagan White House. Sometimes in modern White Houses, they get too carried away in their seeing their president as an unquestioningly brilliant, godlike character, you know? We didn't have to do that in Reagan's White House. We made jokes about him. We had fun with him. We had fun about him. One of the ways you knew the president was coming, by the way, if you were walking through the White House, you assumed the president's in the Oval Office, but sometimes he'd leave there with his detail, go someplace else. I found one of the ways you knew he was coming was you'd be walking along and suddenly you'd hear a burst of laughter. And that laughter told you, the president's coming. I always thought it not insignificant that merry laughter was the sound you heard before Ronald Reagan walked in a room.
First of all, the American dream is a universal one, and it's multifaceted but large.
This 40,000 square foot building serves as the home to Air Force One.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
How does it work exactly? The Guide Cam is actually an iPod Touch.
The Air Force One Discovery Center is an immersive educational experience designed to inspire the next generation of student leaders.
Interactive the Exhibit. It's more than an exhibition, it's an experience.
I like how hands-on it is.
I like seeing the dinosaurs.
For the young and the young at heart.
There's so many awesome things to do that remind me of being a kid again.
Like it shows you everything kind of in the future and past.
A hands-on immersive journey of innovation. Interactive the Exhibit. Open Saturday at the Reagan Library.
As a very junior member in Congress, occasionally I got to ride in Air Force One. Every single time, as we would leave Andrews, the president would come back to see his guests, and he would say, you know, I tried to talk the pilot into diverting and bombing the Capitol, and they just wouldn't do it. And I used to think to myself, we're your allies. What are you talking about? And I think it captured the natural constitutional tension between presidents and Congresses, but he did it with humor, which was his style. I have a picture at home, one of my proudest possessions, of the president and I talking on Air Force One, and we're both laughing. One other funny story, and I'm going to tell you the precedent to it, which was Tom Foley. Foley told the story one time that he was a freshman. He flies into Spokane, Washington, to the airport, which was very small back then. This would be Lyndon Johnson as president, and he gets off the airplane, and the airport manager says to him, "Oh, Congressman Foley, President Johnson is on the line." They run into the office, which has a big glass door, and they close the door so that Foley can speak privately to the president. He's only a freshman, he's been in office about a year. Picks up the phone, the president gets on and says, "About that appropriations bill." And Foley says, "You want Congressman Foley of New York, he's the chairman of appropriations." Lyndon Johnson literally says, "What?" Slams the phone down. Now, all these people are standing outside the door watching. So Foley talks for 3 more minutes to an empty phone, hangs up, goes out and says, "National security, can't share it." Well, I thought of that experience because I was at, we'd gone through a cycle where Nancy had been attacked, and I had defended her on the floor and attacked her critics. And went home, and I was at Bremen High School in Bremen, Georgia, a small town in West Georgia. And I'm talking to the student body, and all of a sudden this person comes rushing out shaking and says, "President Reagan is on the phone." And I'm thinking this is going to be a Tom Foley moment, you know. So I go to the principal's office, close the door, pick up the phone, and the White House operator says, "The president wants to talk to you, hold on a second." And he gets on, and he just wanted to thank me for having defended Nancy. But it was very cool.
Reagan was a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. It was leadership, pure and simple.
In good times and bad, Ronald Reagan embodied optimism. This is so true that I don't even have to tell you his favorite joke. I only have to repeat the punchline. There must be a pony in here somewhere.
When he saw evil camped across the horizon, he called that evil by its name.
Talking about the Cold War, and he said it's not complicated. The way I look at it, we win, they lose.
I was asked later, do you trust Putin? I didn't want to plagiarize President Reagan. I gave one of the great responses, trust but verify, and I wasn't quick enough to think of anything clever that didn't sound like plagiarism. So I said, yeah.
I will always see President Reagan as the last great gentleman of American politics.
The contributions that he made to this country were tremendous, but the contributions he made to the world were even greater.
Ronald Reagan understood that wealth came from the hard work and the intelligence and the creativity of free minds and free people and free markets. And Ronald Reagan trusted ordinary people to make better decisions in their lives than to rely upon Washington bureaucrats, and we should too.
Just when the Reagan Revolution was declared over, millions are being inspired to repeat it, to insist on it. And woe to the leaders in Washington today if they fail to respect it.
I love what Ronald Reagan said. I have to read these to make sure I get the quote quite right. He said, governments don't reduce deficits by raising taxes on people. Government reduces deficits by controlling spending and stimulating new wealth. That's what America's all about.
He was not a great president because he was afraid of his principles. He was a great president because he had principles and he never wavered from governing with them.
Ronald Reagan knew that in this country the issue was not right versus left, it was right versus wrong, and standing up for freedom is always right every time.
There's only Ronald Reagan could do. He shook his head and said, and they call me an actor.
He was a magnificent leader. And anytime I get a chance to speak about his record, I'm proud to do so. And when somebody says, Mr. President, I don't have to ask what president you're talking about. Gentlemen, we were indeed a shining city on a hill.
It is a great honor. I don't do a lot of these events. And I want to thank the people at the Reagan Library. You know, this isn't just a library. I consider this like a national town hall meeting place for people who remember the Reagan Revolution and think we need another. So, thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin. At this time, please turn off all electronic devices. Please refrain from using flash photography during the program. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Mike Love and Mr. Jim Hirsch.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name's John Highbush. I have the honor of being the executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, and I want to thank everyone for coming out today. In honor of our men and women in uniform who protect us around the world, if you'd please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. First, I want to just assure everyone that when I finish with my little remarks, so they're going to take this away and you'll be able to see our guests a lot better. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize a few special guests that we have with us, and first would be Mike Love's wife, Jacqueline, and his daughter, Ambrea, who've joined us this afternoon. Also in the audience, we have a friend of Mike's, someone everyone here I know will recognize, Wink Martindale. Wink. I won't be long-winded in my introduction of Mike because I'm as interested to hear Jim Hirsch interview him as much as you are. For those of you who can't put a name with a face, Jim is what some of us, me included, have always aspired to be. He's a first-rate journalist, has been with the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and he's written a few best-selling books. A couple I'm sure you've heard about, one for Willie Mays, another for Reuben Hurricane Carter. I know that became a great movie. His credits as a writer go far beyond his books and include groundbreaking reporting in the areas of national security and healthcare, philanthropy, just to name a few. So, Jim, we're glad to have you here. Thanks so much for coming. On to Mike. Well, you know, what can you say other than to start out with the fact that there's a lot to say? First, I want to thank him for being such a terrific guy as it relates to his long-standing support for the Reagans. I know he's going to talk with you a little bit about that. It's no secret that his relationship with the Reagans started way back during the time that President Reagan was in office. And I know from firsthand experience, having grown up in D.C., that when he was in the White House, the Beach Boys essentially started a national tradition of free concerts on the Mall every 4th of July. And President Reagan, as a result, called the Beach Boys America's Band. And he was, as usual, absolutely right. I also want to say how special it was to see that tradition continue when the Beach Boys headlined a concert here in honor of President Reagan's centennial celebration, his 100th anniversary of the birth. It was a big success and just incredible when the following day the band got together again under Mike's leadership to join with Mrs. Reagan in singing Happy Birthday to President Reagan. So he's very special to us. Finally, I want to say that all of us here at the library were touched when Mike, you and the Beach Boys sang a tribute to Mrs. Reagan earlier this year when she passed away. That was above and beyond the call, and it just shows that President Reagan was a solid judge of character in noting that Mike was just a good and decent man. Now, I have the honor of introducing some special people from this stage before, from former presidents to movie stars and war heroes and authors. But there's very few that I've introduced to this stage that have had a life as big as Mike Love's. You know, I don't know, how do you value the contribution of a man who was an original founder of arguably the most popular rock band of all time? I would say that that is priceless. And how do we properly remember his band's contributions to the very fabric of our nationhood? There's no doubt that the Beach Boys are an instantly recognizable piece of Americana in any study of modern American history. And finally, how do you thank Mike for making such big contributions to the American music scene, including giving over 5,600 concerts in 26 countries, writing the lyrics to 11 of the 12 Beach Boys' top 10 hits, and singing lead on 10 of them, being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and honored with a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. Now, Mike has yet another contribution to add to this list. It's his book, Good Vibrations, which I hope everyone here will take the opportunity to buy and have Mike sign. It is the #1 bestseller in the popular music category on Amazon.com. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would, please join me in welcoming to the stage at the Reagan Library, Mr. Mike Love and Mr. James Hirsch.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Everyone can hear me?
Are we on?
I think we're on.
Okay, good.
So we've got to behave. Well, Mike, let me start with this. Since the book came out last month, you've had a chance to appear in some tremendous venues around the country to talk about your story, but I don't think you've appeared any place quite as special and august as this library. So why don't we just start by talking about your relationship and your friendship with the Reagans and how that kind of culminated with the big concerts on the Mall in 1983 and 84.
Well, we wouldn't be here in this beautiful facility were it not for Nancy Reagan. Yeah, really. In the world of politics, as we all know all too well, it can be rather contentious and people can get to hate each other for having a different opinion. And a lot of times there's a lot of, back and forth that one would rather not hear or see. But for me, the relationship between Nancy and Ronald Reagan transcended politics by light years. She was just such an amazing person who loved her Ronnie. And I'll tell you something, when James Watt, the Secretary of Interior under the Reagans for a while, first made the decision that rock music wasn't appropriate for July 4th. This is a couple years after we began doing free concerts in Washington, D.C., which I came up with that idea because the United States has given us so much, why don't we try and do something symbolically anyway and there were a few 100,000 people that would show up at our concerts. Then all of a sudden, James Watt said that our music wouldn't be appropriate for July 4th. Well, Nancy Reagan called, and I was in Canada with the group. We were recording, and we were getting ready to go on stage in a half hour or so, and all of a sudden, we're in Canada, and there's a call saying White House is calling. I said, what? I said, White House calling? Yes. Go to the production room. Hold on for Mrs. Reagan. Mrs. Reagan called me. So she says, Mike, I wanted to call and apologize. For what, Mrs. Reagan? She says, well, James Watt said that the Beach Boys were fans of the Reagans. What I said and what I told him was that Ronnie and I have always been fans of the Beach Boys. She actually apologized. She took the time and effort and had the concern to, she was that great a person that she would actually call to clarify something so inconsequential in light of what was going on in the world. But when that edict came down from James Watt, there were something like 40,000, I was told there was like 40,000, there were 40,000 calls to the Department of Interior and messed up their phone system for quite a while. So we spoke a little bit, and she invited me to come to the White House, and spent an hour talking with her, and it was really great. And so when the press asked her, well, what was Mike Love talking to you about? She says, well, I think maybe they want me to sing with them. She was so great. But the love that they had, the letter that President Reagan wrote, when he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, was just a mind blower, just touching. I mean, so that devotion and that love for each other just transcended anything and everything as far as I was concerned. So, anyway, so that was just a, like I said, we were invited to come to do the Reagan Centennial. I said, absolutely, and it was pretty far out. And here's the Air Force One hanging up there, and our stage was set up, and all his cabinet members were in the front row, rocking out to help me, Rhonda, and stuff. It was pretty amazing. And then, of course, more recently, we were here for her, her funeral, burial, and all that. And that was, once again, just the accolades and she just engendered so much love and admiration by so many people. And I know a lot of people don't like people because of their political affiliation, but I think we're all humans, and to see that type of devotion admired and respected worldwide by so many people is just a real gift. Great. So we wouldn't be here without Nancy Reagan, I don't think.
Very good. Very good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the music. John mentioned your track record of writing so many popular songs. One thing that I noticed, Mike, when I was researching this book was how often I would hear the Beach Boys music when I was in the shopping mall, the airport, restaurants, hotel lobbies, the dentist office. But the Beach Boy music is so embedded in our country, in part of our DNA. And as I came to understand the story, it was really the music that you and Brian created in terms of those hits. Help Me Around, To Catch a Wave, I Get Around, Surfin' Safari, Surfin' USA, on and on and on. And so maybe you could just talk to us, because I found this interesting, and when we were doing this together, it was just so how you came up with lyrics that are now, people can just hear the first beat of that song and they know the lyrics to come. So take a song like California Girls. Tell us how you came up with the words to that song.
Well, my cousin Brian was in the studio with what they call a wrecking crew, which are these great. The reason they were called a wrecking crew is because a lot of the more staid and traditional recording, musicians thought that the Wrecking Crew was going to wreck the business because they were doing rock and roll. And a lot of these guys were really great jazz drummers, and Carol Kay, the bass player. They're all incredible musicians, including Glenn Campbell, who made his living as a studio musician before he became worldwide known as Glenn. But in that particular instance, all Brian had was the name or the term California Girls. And so I thought, okay, I wish they all could be California Girls. And the idea being, we were young guys that had some hits, you know, we'd had Surfing Safari, Surfing USA, I Get Around, Fun, Fun, Fun. And here we are talking about, we'd been invited, we'd gone to Australia, we'd been to Japan, we'd been to England, we'd been to the continent. And we, of course, young guys, were all enamored with or checking out all the girls as we're going here. Wish they all could be California Girls. It's a real simple concept, but we looked at California as a microcosm of the US, which is a microcosm of the world. And I just wanted to be really inclusive. Some people have misunderstood the intention of that song, thinking that we're deifying or glorifying girls only from California, but the idea is that we all came from other places in the world, and I wish they all could be California Girls is the concept, and that's the chorus. And I wrote the words from the standpoint of, well, where do you start? And East Coast, you know, with the fashion, you know, a lot of intelligence, a lot of colleges, you know, all the Ivy League itself, but these girls are hip. I really dig the styles they wear because of the fashion connotation. Southern girls, okay. Charming, you know, dialect, charming beyond belief. You know. And then the Midwest. I really screwed up though. I said farmers' daughters, and I should have said Midwest lovely ladies instead, because I don't mean that all the girls from the Midwest are farmers' daughters, but it has a connotation, I must admit. So I'm not saying I did perfect on all the lyrics, okay? But then northern girls, okay, keep their boyfriends warm at night. Well, so it was just a little tour around the U.S. And then the West Coast, that's where we lived, grew up, and loved the environment. We looked around our environment. We were only a few miles from the beach. We all went to our schools. We loved listening to the radio. We'd go to the school dance looking for romance, like in Barbara Ann. But so West Coast has the sunshine and the girls all get so tan. Sadly, in my family, the girls nor I got tan. So there was a little, what they call in the commercial business, they call heightened reality. Yeah, and that was heightened reality, but I'm guilty of that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, and French bikini on Hawaiian Island dolls by a palm tree in the sand. Well, when Western Airlines offered a round-trip airfare for $200.04 to Hawaii, if we had a long weekend, I was in Waikiki. That was some fun times. So we just encapsulated all these concepts and the whole wide world and put it into this song. And I wrote the words in the hallway while the track was being finished. I just wrote it out on yellow legal line paper. And that was the way that California Girls evolved. But I sure hope that people are getting the idea that we're being inclusive rather than exclusive.
I think so.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing that was interesting is that really the origins of the Beach Boys is really the friendship between you and Brian growing up as first cousins, but also as best friends. Maybe you can just talk about what that was like, you know, growing up with Brian and the kind of friendship you had and how that evolved into what became the Beach Boys.
Well, even before Brian and I were born, music was everything to the Wilson family. They had no money whatsoever. In fact, when they came to, it's in the book, my grandfather Love said California is the ultimate, but my grandmother Wilson came with a few of her kids. She had 9 of them, 8 of them lived to maturity. And they came on a train from Kansas during the Dust Bowl days. I mean, it was just so, let me say this. When they got to California, they had no money, so they actually camped on the beach in Southern California for a couple of months before they found a place. That's how much, that's their status economically in the world when they came to California, with just the dream of coming to a better place, where maybe they might not freeze to death during the winter. You know, my mom was born in Hutchinson, Kansas. My dad was born in LA because my grandfather Love had the good sense to come from rural Louisiana to Southern California in 1909. So they met in high school. But what always has blown my mind, and the reason I don't get an attitude and I never act, I mean, I might be aloof sometimes because I'm basically an introvert. That's the reason I appear to be aloof. It's more like I'm an introvert than anything else. But when you're lead singer of a rock band, you're no longer able to be introverted. you have to develop something. At any rate, it always has blown my mind that one generation after poverty, through hard work and a little bit of luck, here we are using that, putting to use the love of music that, because of my partnership and friendship with my cousin Brian and the love of the music that we both had, we were able to craft some songs that resonated not only in Southern California, not only in the US, but around the world. And so it's all to do with the love of creating the harmonies. Zero to do with ego, zero to do with money, zero to do with fame. It all had to do with the pure love of getting together and creating the harmonies. And that's the essential ingredient of the Beach Boys music. And so love is at the core of it. Now there's all kinds of crap that happens when you start a group, the business part of it, the ego part of it, lifestyle choices and things that aren't fun to think about or talk about or write about. But I think Jim did an incredible job in researching so many things and gave this book such context, not only in terms of the individuals involved that gave birth to the Beach Boys, but also the times that we lived, starting in the previous generation and up till this day. So I think this fellow here is to be congratulated for the amazing job he did in all the research and position. Yeah.
Well, that's very kind of Mike, so I'll just exchange the compliment very briefly before we return to this. But in doing the research for this book, a lot of people ask me, well, what was it like? Because, Mike has this reputation and this and that, to work with Mike. And what I explained to them is that Mike and his wife, Jacqueline, were so gracious. When I was interviewing Mike, I didn't just show up at their house and interview for 2 hours and leave. They invited me into their home. And I stayed with Mike for 3-4 days at a time. In fact, there were some people in the audience who I saw or who we were on the phone with when I was there. And so, as all of you know, when you move in with someone, that's when you really know what's going on. And I'm not going to occupy more time than I should, but it was just such an amazing experience to be with such gracious hosts and wonderful people as Mike and Jacqueline are, and that's why this project was so special. But let me just ask you, this is a really good audience to ask you this question, Mike. One of the things that was fascinating about you is that during the height of the Cold War, you were really intent on trying to get the Beach Boys to play in Soviet Union and China, our adversaries. Now, you mentioned, or John mentioned, the Beach Boys were this international band. You guys were in Japan before the Beatles were in 1966, and you've now been in Korea and Czechoslovakia and every place in between. But why did you want to take the Beach Boys to these adversarial communist countries?
Because I didn't believe that we were adversarial as human beings. So I remember flying into Prague on a private plane, and On one side of the runway were MiG-15 jets. On the other side of the runway, there were about 100 tanks. The people of Czechoslovakia wanted their freedom from the USSR, but at the time, whoever was in charge of the USSR didn't want that to happen, so they deposed a guy named Dubček, who was the leader of Czechoslovakia. And, but we performed there, and it was amazing. We had a song at the time called Breakaway, and I dedicated it to Mr. Dubček, because I'm a smartass sometimes. Breakaway, get it? Okay, so, but what was amazing is English is anything but a language that's understandable by the Czechs. But what they could understand was the fact that we were from America and we represented relative freedom compared to what they were going through or had gone through just recently. They also liked rock and roll, something with a beat, and they also liked the sound. In fact, not only in Czechoslovakia, in Germany, we'd get fan letters from Russia or China, and like when we play a song in Japan, if they hear "around, round, get around," they erupt in cheers. And the same thing goes for every intro of every song, like California Girls, dun, 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 whoa. This is in Japan. Now, the thing that always just blows my mind, they're never, ever gonna understand what we're talking about when we sing a super stock Dodge winding out in low. My fuel-injected Stingray is really starting to go. To get the traction, I'm riding the clutch. My pressure plate's burning that machine's too much. Shut down, okay? They're not going to get, but they love the sound. They love the feeling. And so it's always, you know, it's blown my mind, is a nice way of putting it, how our music has been, you know, a hit in Sweden and all over Scandinavia, as well as South Africa and Australia is understandable because Australia is one big surfing country, and they speak a form of English. But that's not the case in France and Germany and Japan and all that. So that's been one of the more miraculous things about our music is the fact that it's you know, giving people enjoyment all around the world.
Great. Just a couple more questions, then we'll open it up to the audience. One of the interesting sort of chapters in your life was when you went to India in 1968 to the Maharishi's ashram, and who was there when you arrived? But the Beatles. And you were, you know, friendly with the Beatles prior to that. But just talk to us about that experience. Maybe talk first about why transcendental meditation was important to you, but then what it was like to spend those days with the Beatles in the middle of nowhere.
Well, that was amazing. I was invited to go, I went to the Harvard Law Forum in your neck of the woods. Yeah. He lives in Massachusetts. Harvard Law Forum, and saw Maharishi give a speech. And sitting very close to me was Mia Farrow, who had recently, at the urging of her sister Prudence, who was Dear Prudence of the Beach Boys, the Beatles' White Album. I was invited to India by Maharishi after that speech. The night after that speech at the Harvard Law Forum, I called the hotel hoping to get in touch with somebody with Maharishi, and he answered the phone. He said, "Who's calling?" I said, "This is Michael of Beach Boys. This is Maharishi." And so I said, "Oh." He says, "Are you coming to India? You should come to India and bring your group." And I had no idea that the Beatles were going to be there when I got there. But I said, "I don't know if the other guys will come, but I'm coming." So I just prepared to go to India. I flew there, crossed the Ganges River, and went, you know, had some people help me with my luggage, which I always carry too much of, up the slope to the ashram, and what do you know? But the Beatles were there with their girlfriends and wives and stuff, and I was completely surprised that they were all there. And so was Donovan, so was Mia Farrow, and like I said, her sister Prudence. Now, at that time, Maharishi, we'd already learned meditation, but I'd only been meditating for a couple of months. And what it was a teacher training course, a course where you were there for 2.5 to 3 months to learn to become a teacher of TM, which I did not at that time, because when I was invited, I accepted the invitation, but I didn't even know what the purpose of being there was. But that's what it was. Now, Prudence took it extremely seriously when Maharishi said, you should go and meditate for as many hours as comfortable. So I maybe the most I ever meditated for was maybe 6 or 8 hours. And that I thought was a lot. But then there were people that would meditate for 12, 24, whatever. Prudence, they had to go in and get her out of her room. She has a PhD in Sanskrit from the University of California in Berkeley. And so she took it very seriously. She's one of the most active teachers of TM in the country, if not the world. And brilliant lady, just great person. But this course was attractive to me because if enough people were to learn to meditate, it would be an entirely different world. There would be more peace and prosperity, and that was the goal of what Maharishi's whole movement had to do with, creating more peace and prosperity and happiness in the planet. And so there are many, many lectures and really great things about that, about being there. But then it took me a couple more years, though, to become a teacher of TM and actually go understanding that this is what that purpose is for. Did that along with Alan Jardine, one of the other group members, a couple years later. And then in 1977, I think it was, went for a 6-month-long meditation course, living as a monk and meditating and doing an advanced program called the TM City program. So obviously it's been an important part of my life. And in the dedication of the book, my first dedication is to my mom, whose love of music set the stage for what was to come. Second, the dedication is my father, whose hard work and devotion to his family was an inspiration. And third was Maharishi, and well, Jacqueline too. but so there's 4 people. The dedication. Yes.
Well, let me just ask you one more question, then we'll open it up. Mike, you performed last year, I think it was 170 some odd concerts? 172 concerts.
I used to say 175, but I was corrected.
Okay, and this year it's the same. Right now, the Beach Boys perform more live concerts than they've ever performed in their 55-year history.
Mm-hmm.
And you're 75 years old. You're working more than you ever worked. What keeps you going? Why do you keep doing this?
The IRS. No, I have the energy and I have the love of the music, and I really enjoy the audience response to our songs. And we're obsessed. Mr. Foskett will know this, Mr. Jeffrey Foskett. He's one of the band members who he was with the Beach Boys for many years, and he was with Cousin Brian for many years, and now he's back with us. And we are focused, seriously focused and obsessed is a good word, about recreating the songs as close to humanly possible to the records in concert. And sometimes we add a little something to, like for instance, to the end of Good Vibrations, because it is the end of our main part of our set before our encore. But when you see entire families turn out, I'm talking about the senior citizens and their children and their children's children, it's amazing to see, all ages from 8 to 80 enjoying the shows. I mean, so how could you not like that? Because first of all, I had a hand in writing a lot of the more well-known songs. Second of all, I had a hand in singing them and thirdly, performing them. And I've always liked the live appearances better than the studio. Studio is a necessary tool, and you can do some incredible things in a studio. But when you see the songs come to life with the real audience full of people, and they show such appreciation. And in certain instances, you know, it's like euphoric in some cases. Not everybody, because, you know, when you do a show, you understand that some people wanted to come see the Beach Boys. Some people are just with the person who wanted to come see the Beach Boys. So your job is to convert everybody in the room to be fans, if at all possible. So you give it your best shot. So I think it works in so many levels. First of all, you know, you're doing what you love to do as a family hobby that turned into a profession. Second of all, you've been lucky enough to be, you know, to be wanted to be heard from. Well, for people to give you invitations all around the world. Like, we're going to be going from the Bahamas on February 1. Our next show is going to be in Sydney, Australia. 23 and a half hours to get from one to the other. So, but it's a miracle. And then a couple months later, we're going to be in Royal Albert Hall in London. And then the continent, Paris, all over Germany, Holland, you know, we just got an offer for Barcelona. So I mean, how could you not like it if you love music and you feel any sense of you know, pride in having had something to do with the creation of the songs and the performance of them.
Yeah. And Mike is too modest to say this, but I'll say it. But, you know, over the last 55 years, the Beach Boys have had a lot of highs and they've had some lows. But even during the lows, the only reason the catalog stayed alive was because of this guy. I mean, the Beach Boys would have ended decades ago, if not for Mike. All of the original Beach Boys at one point quit the Beach Boys, except for Mike Love, because he had the most faith in the band and the most belief in the music.
Maybe so. Thank you.
So I'm going to let John invite questions and for Mike.
Yeah, Mike has been kind enough to agree to take questions from the audience. We've got time for several, not for all, I'm sure, but if you've got a question, if you'd raise your hand, you'll see we have staff throughout the auditorium that have microphones. If you could just wait till we put the mic in your hand and go from there. We'll start right here.
Hello, Mr. Love. Thank you for coming. My question is, what year did you record your first song? And was that Disney Girls? And can you tell me anything about how that those lyrics came about?
Well, the first song we recorded is called Surfin', and that was 1961. Yeah, we were asked originally to do a folk song by a fellow who was a producer. And we said, well, we like the Kingston Trio, we like Peter, Paul, and Mary, but we're not into folk music as much as we are into R&B and rock and roll. So let us come back to you with something. And so my cousin Dennis and I used to go fishing and sometimes surfing down in southern Redondo Beach, Manhattan Beach, Hermosa Beach, South Bay surfers, they called us. At any rate, I talked to him about we should do this song. He went back and talked to his brother Brian. So then after one session where we said, no, we don't want to do a folk song, we want to bring you back something different, we came up with this song. Brian and I just wrote the song Surfin' in just, you know, very short order. And, you know, so that was our first song, fall of 1961. And just a short time after recording it, it was on the radio. And it's in my book, how we cheated to get it played on the radio. Well, it wasn't cheating, it was just nepotism. We put the word out to our entire family. Now, my mom was one of 8 kids that lived maturity, so all the cousins, all the aunts and uncles, everybody phoned in, and we won we won the contest on the local radio. Yeah, it was good.
Back here.
Hi, Mike. We flew out here from St. Louis to be here today. St. Louis, home of the great Chuck Berry, who just turned 90 years old last week.
Yeah.
And just was kind of curious, your thoughts about Chuck and his influence on you and on the Beach Boys. Thank you.
Yeah, Chuck Berry was a huge influence. First of all, I loved his songs. But I really, the way it's called alliteration, the way he syncopated the lyrics with the beat was brilliant. And Paul McCartney said he was like the greatest rock writer, you know, and I agree with him. And like we did originally, when we first became a group and we did our shows, we would do 4 or 5 Chuck Berry songs. Rock and roll music we eventually recorded, and it went to top 5 on an album called 15 Big Ones. And so, yeah, he was a huge influence. Like he would, like some of his lyrics were like, when I got on a city bus and found me a vacant seat, I thought I saw my future bride walking down the street. I shouted to the driver, hey conductor, you must slow down. I think I see her, please let me off this bus. I mean, come on. The lyric that got me though was, she moves around like a wayward summer breeze. Go driver, go on, catch her for me, please. Moving through the crowd, trying to get to where she's at, and I was campaign shouting like a Southern diplomat. That just about finished me off right there. Blew my mind bad. Anyway, so when I wrote the words to Be True to Your School, I said, when some loud braggart, not bragger, it sounds like bragger, but if you ever read literature, you might know what braggart means. It's braggadocio. Anyway, when some loud braggart tries to put me down and says the school is great, I tell him right away, now what's the matter, buddy? Ain't you heard of my school? It's #1 in the state. It's the same kind of syncopation that Chuck Berry did. So it was a huge influence on me.
Great. Over here.
Thank you.
Hi, I've got a question about Carl Wilson, who you don't ever seem to read a whole lot about. But when the band got started, he was only 14.
Right.
He still had a little baby fat. Everyone else in the band is an athlete. I know you were a high school athlete.
Mm-hmm.
He's got one brother who's a sex symbol, one brother who's a genius. And I'm wondering, did he feel any kind of pressure to kind of look more in conform with what a teen idol was supposed to look like in those days?
I'm not sure he felt pressure to. That's a really deep question, and I don't know the whole psychology behind it, but I do know that he had the voice of an angel. I mean, I wrote the words Good Vibrations, and I came up, I'm picking up good vibrations, she's giving me the excitation. I wrote all the words, and came up with that hook and sang that chorus. But he did the verse on not only that, but he'd already done God Only Knows a few months before. I mean, if you listen to his voice, that says it all. So maybe he wasn't here on the planet to be, an athlete or something. Maybe he was just meant to be one of the better singers that you've ever heard. And he was also, complete. We were partners in the live group because when his brother Brian left in 1964, Carl had the complete focus on having the band, the instrumentalists, be as good as humanly possible. So he's very focused on the music, fantastic singer, and he was always nice to everybody. So, I think, I don't know what I can say. Maybe somebody should write a book about Carl Wilson. That would be nice.
Right over here.
Mike, I've enjoyed you since the 60s, and I did some music when I was in high school, and I was just wondering, did you ever play an instrument, number one, and what influence your parents had on you when you were growing up?
Well, my mother had a tremendous influence on all of this. I'm the oldest of 6, and so we all had to take piano lessons. And when I say had to take piano lessons, I mean that sincerely. We also took oil painting lessons. And yeah, I mean, I have some oil paintings. My father was great. He was great. He was good at doing, he was a sheet metal worker, but he did the drafting. He did really beautiful stuff. He could draw beautifully. And so he could paint as well. And so my mom was all into the arts. The only problem, and I talk about it in the book, was that she would wake us up to go to school by playing opera music. To hear a soprano at 6:30 in the morning hitting a high note, Maria Callas, Renata Tebaldi, whoever, it was just unbelievably traumatic. But she did love her opera, and she sang on the Madame Butterfly on the radio. It was a big deal in the 1930s. So music was a pervasive. It was just part of growing up. There's never been a time in my life when there wasn't music, because there was always music since the previous generation when her mother sang to her. So yes, I played the piano, and that came in handy. I complained because I'd rather be out playing ball of some sort, you know. But it came in handy because when we did our Christmas album, we were forced to read music, and I could actually read the music, you know, which is great. So it helped me out in that way. But most of it was done by ear. Everybody in our family had a good ear for music. And yeah, and it's kind of handed down to Amba, my daughter Amba over here, who's a great singer, and she has a fantastic ear. And they performed with us as part of California Saga on the Beach Boys' 50th anniversary tour. So it's just a family tradition that's multiple generations. But yes, music, big influence. My mom was a huge influence on all of that.
Yes, back here.
Hi, you mentioned how important harmonies were, and I think in music circles I've heard it said that the Beatles have gotten or were inspired with their harmonies from the Beach Boys. Have you heard that comparison yourself?
You know, there have been a lot of things said by a lot of important artists. You should, if you get the chance, get the Goldmine magazine, which is out now, and it has the 50th anniversary of Pet Sounds, and it has an interview about this book. And yeah, there's so many people who said such fantastic things about the Beach Boys and the harmonies, but specifically things like God Only Knows. I mean, people have, you know, really said incredible things about that, and some of the vocal sounds. And, you know, we worked really hard on doing those harmonies. I mean, and at one time, my cousin Brian was, I call him the Stalin of the studio, because he was so, you know, he drove us to do absolutely the best background sounds we could possibly come up with, which we did. Not only the leads, but the backgrounds, all the harmonies and the chord progressions, which distinguished the Beach Boys from so many other groups. And it's been an inspiration to a lot of people, whether they do that kind of music or not. There have been, you know, dozens of people that are really important in music who have said really wonderful things about the Beach Boys, and great things about my cousin Brian and the groundbreaking work that he did in the mid-'60s.
Yes, back here.
Hi, Mike. You and the Beach Boys have rocked our lives for a long time. We grew up in Brooklyn. Prior to you know, the British invasion, we had doo-wop music. I know the Beach Boys have embraced doo-wop music. Can you talk a little bit about the Beach Boys, the harmonies, and the doo-wop influence? We also saw you at Brooklyn College in the mid-'70s. Do you remember that show at all? And talk about
Like it was yesterday. Yeah. Okay, surfing. Bum, bum, dip, 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 bum, bum, dip, dip. What do you think that is? It's doo-wop, right? We covered Why Do Fools Fall in Love, Frankie Lyman. So what can I say? One of my favorite songs that we don't even do on the show is Come Go With Me, which is a great song. It was a chart record for us. But see, I have a bunch of younger musicians with me who have attitudes towards everything. It's like, Woody, Yeah. So I'm hoping to integrate a couple more things that we haven't been done in a while in our next year or so of touring. But yeah, doo-wop is a huge influence. Everly Brothers are a monstrous influence. Four Freshmen separated the men from the boys when it comes to harmonies. Those guys were amazing musicians and singers. So that was something that really we strove to be as good as we could be, and that was, if we could come up to that level of musicianship, we'd be achieving something, and I think we did. In fact, if nobody's ever heard of it, try to get in touch with the Lord's Prayer, recorded by the Beach Boys, which my cousin Brian structured those harmonies. I sing the bass part, the lowest part, but it's all over the place. It was one of the most difficult things to learn, but it was worth it. When we played it back for some people, and in fact, Bill Medley was in the studio next door recording, and he came in and listened to that, and he still tells me to this day he remembers hearing it at that time, the Lord's Prayer, which it's beautiful. But doo-wop itself was a huge influence. Of course, it was I was going to high school when all the stuff was going on. So my cousin Brian and I would get together with my sister or Aunt Audrey or whatever, and we'd do all the songs that we heard on the radio, and probably at least a third of them were doo-wop. And so, yeah, it was a huge influence. It's an American form of music, which is just phenomenal. It's Chuck Berry, doo-wop, Everly Brothers, Four Freshmen. That about gives you the major influence of the Beach Boys. And then from there, it's the way we sound and subject matter,
Right here.
Thanks for coming out to the Reagan Library.
Thank you for being here. That goes for everybody.
I'm kind of going to piggyback on the previous two questions, but I've always been a rumor, always been stories that it was the Beach Boys who taught the Chicago how to harmonize, the band Chicago.
Pardon me?
There was always stories around that the Beach Boys actually taught the band Chicago how to harmonize, because at one time they were just a horn band, and then they started, when their vocals started to harmonize together in some of their later music.
Well, some of us sang on their song, Wishing You Were Here. So we added harmonies to the song that they came up with. I don't think we taught anybody harmonies. I think there are other people that taught all of us harmonies. But, I mean, we have inspired other people to strive to do great things, and that's good. But I wouldn't say we taught Chicago, but we did add our voices to one of their songs. And we did a great tour with them. Beach Boys Chicago we've done 3 different tours with them. The first one was unbelievably successful. Yeah.
Thanks. Right over here.
Hi, Mike. I'm Carol from Redondo. And,
where's that?
South Bay. Your relationship with your cousin now, you're really touring in 2 different groups, Brian and Al, and you and Bruce. What's your relationship like now? You guys have had so many ups and downs. Still good?
Well, that would be tough to say that it's great, except for one thing. If it were just Brian and I, and perhaps a piano, nature would take over and we'd go and write a song. But in 2012, we had spoken about doing some music together, but it was disallowed. And it wasn't by Brian or me. So it's unfortunate, but that's the truth. Anyway, so, it would be great if paths were cleared so that we could do what comes naturally to us. Because we were incredibly successful together when we wrote together. Yeah.
Time for one last question. I'm sorry, we'll go right back here.
Hi, I'm 17 and I really, really love your music, like a lot. I know all the words to all your songs. If you could have collaborated with anyone in the 60s that you haven't, who would it be?
Pardon me?
If you could have collaborated with anyone in the 60s, who would it be?
Well, I did.
Like other people.
No, I was being a little bratty, I'm sorry. No, I was in India at Maharishi's place, and Paul McCartney comes down to the breakfast table saying, listen to this, Mike. Flew in from Miami Beach, BOAC, didn't get to bed last. Well, anyway, so he's doing a song called Back in the USSR, which I don't know if you've heard it. It's a Beatles song. But I said, hey, Paul, what you got to do in the middle part is talk about all the girls around Russia, Ukraine girls and Moscow girls and Georgia on my mind. I like to say I was trying to confine the Beatles to Russia, but it didn't work. But yeah, so I gave him the idea, and it turns out that Sir Paul is pretty good at crafting a tune. So yeah, so I did collaborate in that way. I gave him a couple ideas. But there were so many great artists of the 60s and so many great songs. It was just a phenomenal time to be, coming out with our songs. But I mean, obviously the Beatles and Beach Boys get a lot of ink for being popular in the 60s. But what about Motown? Oh my goodness, and other artists as well. The Mamas and Papas and on and on and on. So it was a spectacular time for music and for songs. The song value was so incredible. So I'm happy to hear that somebody 17 likes our music. Yeah. It bodes well for the future of humanity. Yeah.
If you all could let Mike and Jim pass through this way, he can make it to the store where he'll sign your books. It's worth getting this book. It's just fantastic. So you can still buy it upstairs at the store. On behalf of the Reagan Library and everyone here, I just want to say thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.